The text message came at exactly 10:04 p.m., glowing across the cracked screen of my phone like a wound I could not look away from. My daughter Angela had written the words so simply, so coldly, that they pierced deeper than any knife. "You are not joining us. My husband thinks it's better for you to leave." My fingers trembled as I held the phone, the blue light flickering across the lines in my face, lines carved by years of sacrifice and sleepless nights spent building a life for her. In that moment, in the quiet of my small Detroit living room, I felt the air collapse around me. The firewood crackled once in the hearth, then fell silent, as if even the house knew something had just broken that could never be repaired. I had just finished folding the last sweater I thought I would pack for the family trip we had been planning for months. The suitcase sat open on the rug, half filled with clothes neatly pressed. A bottle of aspirin tucked into the side pocket and a little red scarf I had bought for my granddaughter Sophia. My hand slipped and the sweater fell to the floor. I stared at it for a long second, unable to move, unable to breathe, while my phone pulsed in my hand with that cruel message. For weeks, Angela had said this trip would be different. She promised it would be about family, about healing old wounds, about letting Sophia spend more time with her grandmother. She told me, "Mom, this will be just us. Family only." I had believed her. God help me, I had believed her. I had believed every syllable because hope is a dangerous drug, and I was still addicted to it even after all the years of being sidelined, overlooked, used. And now, with one line of text, that hope was ripped out of me, leaving nothing but the raw ache of betrayal. My chest burned as if someone had poured acid over my heart. I sat down on the edge of the couch, the cushions sighing beneath me, and reread the message again and again, as if maybe the words would change if I looked long enough. But they didn't change. They stayed sharp. They stayed final. "You are not joining us." My daughter, my only child, had erased me. And worse, she had done it on behalf of the man she married, a man who never once saw me as anything more than a walking bank account. I thought of David, his perfect suits, his smug smile, the way he would pat me on the back like I was a child who should be grateful for his approval. "It's better for you to leave," he had told her, and Angela had obeyed. My throat tightened, rage and sorrow twisting together until I felt I could not draw breath. For 62 years, I had carried myself through this world as a woman of strength, as a Black mother who knew the cost of sacrifice, who knew what it meant to work double shifts as a nurse, who knew what it meant to go without so her child could have. I had poured every ounce of myself into Angela's life, and this was my return exile delivered by text message. I rose and walked toward the window. Snow was falling outside, thin flakes catching the glow of the streetlight floating gently down like they were mocking the storm inside me. I pressed my palm against the cold glass, my reflection staring back at me. My eyes were wet, yes, but behind the tears there was something else. A fury I had not felt in decades. The room around me seemed to shrink. The ticking of the clock on the wall grew louder, steadier, relentless, as if reminding me that time was still moving forward even if my heart had stopped. I looked back at the suitcase, its gaping mouth waiting to be filled with dreams that would never happen. The scarf for Sophia lay on top, its bright red color, a cruel reminder of the love I was still desperate to give but no longer allowed to show. My knees gave way and I sank to the carpet. I clutched the scarf to my chest, and for the first time in years, I sobbed without restraint. I sobbed for the girl I raised, for the woman she had become, for the choices that had led her to this betrayal. I sobbed for every dollar I had scraped together to bail her out of debt, for every hour I had worked overtime so she could go to college, for every birthday candle I had lit for her while I ate leftovers in the kitchen alone. The betrayal was not just in the message. It was in the years of silence when she let her husband speak for her. It was in the way she had stopped calling me mom and started saying mother like I was some distant relative. It was in the way she had let David's voice dictate mine. And now it was in the way she had let him erase me altogether. The heat in my chest hardened into something else, then something sharper, something steadier. The tears slowed, though they did not stop. My breathing deepened. My hands stopped shaking. I whispered aloud to the empty room. My voice ragged but clear, no more. That was the night betrayal stopped being just pain. It became the beginning of justice. 2 weeks earlier, everything had seemed almost normal, almost like the family I used to dream about still existed. Angela had called me on a Sunday afternoon, her voice bright, almost childlike, the way it used to be when she needed something. "Mom, we're planning a trip down to Florida, just us family only. You should come. It will be good for Sophia and good for us." The words wrapped around my heart like a soft blanket. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe them. Family only. How long had it been since I had felt like family, since I had been more than a wallet with legs? I clung to that promise like a drowning woman clings to driftwood. I imagined Sophia running to me on the beach, her braids bouncing, her laughter carried on the salty wind. I imagined sitting at a dinner table with my daughter and her husband, maybe even feeling just for a second that I wasn't an outsider in my own bloodline. I had even gone shopping. I bought a new sundress blue with tiny white flowers because Angela always said blue looked nice against my skin. I picked up sunscreen snacks for the road and a wide-brimmed straw hat I knew Sophia would giggle at. "Grandma, you look like a movie star." I could already hear her voice. Those were the kinds of dreams I let myself hold on to in the quiet hours, the small illusions that kept me breathing. I had even told Elaine, my old friend, about the trip. She raised an eyebrow when I described it. "Do you really think they'll make room for you?" she asked carefully. I had waved her off. "It's different this time. Angela wants me there. She said it herself, family only." Elaine's silence had been heavy, but I ignored it. Because hope is heavier still, and I carried it like a stone in my chest. In the days leading up to the trip, I packed slowly, methodically, almost reverently. Every folded shirt was a prayer. Every pair of shoes tucked into the suitcase was a whispered wish. I thought of the nights I had worked doubles at the hospital to pay off Angela's student loans. I thought of the time I emptied my savings to cover the down payment on their house. All of it, I told myself, was leading to this, to finally being seen as more than a source of money, to finally being treated like a mother again. I even planned to cook for them during the trip, to make Angela's favorite peach cobbler, to show David I could still be useful in ways that had nothing to do with cash. The illusion grew so strong that I stopped noticing the cracks. The way Angela avoided eye contact when I asked if the hotel had enough rooms. The way David's voice, always firm, always final, lingered behind her words whenever she spoke. I ignored those shadows because I wanted so badly to believe in the light. Looking back now, it feels like I was preparing for my own funeral, dressing up my hopes in fine clothes and sending them off to die. But at the time, I was smiling. At the time, I thought I was packing for joy. I thought this trip was going to be the start of something new, the mending of old wounds, the proof that after all the sacrifices, I still belonged. And that was the cruelest part of all, that the betrayal hit hardest because I had dared just for a moment to believe in love again. The night of the message, I sat frozen on the couch, but in truth, the knife had been twisting for years. That text was not just a decision made in haste, it was the culmination of a pattern I had ignored for too long. The words came from Angela's phone, yes, but the cadence, the tone, the authority, it was David's voice I heard between the lines. My son-in-law had always been careful to smile in public, to pour me a glass of wine at family gatherings, to ask about my health in that polished, distant way. But beneath it all, there was a calculation in his eyes. He had never seen me as a woman or as a mother. He saw me as a resource, a faucet that poured money into their lives whenever he turned the handle. "You are not joining us." That wasn't my daughter speaking. That was her husband drawing the line, erasing me with one swipe of his thumb across her phone screen. And Angela let him. She didn't just let him, she carried his words like gospel. Minutes later, another message followed, smaller, weaker, but no less cruel. "Please understand, Mom. Don't make it worse. Don't make it worse." I stared at that phrase until the letters blurred. I thought of the countless times I had swallowed my pride, stayed silent, and told myself I was keeping the peace. When David spoke over me at the dinner table, when he suggested I downsize my home so I could help them more, when Angela repeated his words as if they were her own, her eyes sliding away from mine. I had stayed quiet, then thinking silence was love. But now here it was in black and white. Silence had only taught them I could be erased. My body shook not from fear, but from the memory of all the other exclusions. The year Angela turned 30, she threw a party I wasn't invited to because David said it was for their friends only. The Christmas when I arrived with gifts and was told there wasn't enough space at the table, so I ate on a stool by the kitchen door. The summer Sophia was baptized and I was placed in the back pew while David's parents sat proudly up front. Each cut had been small, almost invisible at the time, but together they had bled me dry. And still, I gave. I gave because that is what mothers do. I gave because I thought one day Angela would look at me and see more than the money I offered. But that night, reading those words, I finally saw the truth. She had chosen him over me. She had chosen his comfort over my love, his judgment over my presence. My throat tightened until I could barely breathe. My hand hovered over the phone, wanting to type something back, anything that would make her remember the nights I held her through fevers, the mornings I braided her hair before school, the afternoons I skipped meals so she could eat. But my fingers never moved. There was nothing left to say. A child who lets a man dictate her mother's place has already made her choice. And as much as it tore me apart, I realized I had to make mine. The house had never felt so quiet. Even the fire, which had been crackling moments before, seemed to wither into silence, leaving only the occasional snap of embers, like the faint heartbeat of a dying body. I sat there phone face down on the arm of the couch, staring at the patterns in the old carpet, as if they might give me answers. My chest rose and fell too fast, and the scarf I had bought for Sophia lay in my lap, a bright streak of red against the gray of my nightdress. The air smelled of pine from the wreath still hanging on the door, a reminder that the holidays were supposed to be about family, about togetherness. But here I was, exiled from my own blood. My eyes drifted to the walls. The photographs hung crooked frames tilted from years of settling in this old house. One showed Angela at 8 years old standing proudly in her first dance recital outfit, grinning with missing teeth. Another showed her in her cap and gown at college graduation, a moment I had worked double shifts to pay for, a moment I thought was proof that my sacrifices had been worth it. My throat closed as I studied those frozen smiles. Did she remember me standing in the back of that auditorium clapping until my hands were raw? Did she remember the way I hid my exhaustion so she could have those moments untouched by worry? Or had all those memories been replaced by David's voice telling her I was nothing more than an obligation? I stood slowly and crossed the room, my knees aching, my hand brushing the wooden banister worn smooth by decades of use. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old wood scents that had become as much a part of me as my own skin. I pressed my palm to the window pane. The glass was icy, and the snow outside fell heavier now, blanketing the street in a stillness that mocked my turmoil. I could see my reflection faintly in the glass-lined face, silver streaks in my hair, eyes clouded with tears. But beneath the sorrow was something else, a steel I hadn't felt in years. The clock on the wall ticked steadily each second, hammering against my ribs like a drum. Time was moving. Life was moving, even as mine felt like it had stopped, and yet the world was reminding me it would not wait for me to catch up. My gaze fell to the table in the corner. On it sat a stack of bills I had paid for Angela just last month. The ink of the check stub stared back at me, undeniable proof of what I had given, what I had lost. I thought about the nights I left at the hospital, bone-weary, feet swollen from standing 12 hours, hands raw from sanitizer, back aching from lifting patients twice my size. I would collapse into this very chair, head pounding, but I never complained. Because all of it was for Angela. All of it was so she would not have to know that kind of pain. And now she had chosen to erase me with a message typed by another man's hand. My heart clenched, but the sobs had stopped. The tears still burned in my eyes, but there was a clarity sharpening beneath them. I realized something in that silence. Pain is heavy, but anger carries its own strength. Betrayal had hollowed me out, but in that hollow space, a seed of resolve had begun to grow. I whispered into the quiet room, my voice low, almost foreign in my own ears. I am done being invisible. The words hung there heavy and final, and for the first time in years, I believed them. By morning, the fog of shock had thinned enough for the memories to arrange themselves like pieces of evidence laid out on a courtroom table. Each moment, each sacrifice, each humiliation fell into place with a clarity that seared me. I sat at the kitchen table, the steam from my coffee curling in the air, and pulled open the drawer where I kept my files. I had always been meticulous keeping receipts, bank statements, and contracts in neat folders labeled by year. At the time, I thought it was just the habit of a nurse who had learned to document everything. Now, as I spread the papers across the table, I realized it was my salvation. The first folder was thick with credit card bills. Angela's name appeared again and again in charges that were never hers to make designer clothes. Spa visits, dinners, and restaurants I had never set foot in. I remembered confronting her once years ago about a bill that had climbed to $5,000. She had cried, promised to pay me back, promised it would never happen again. I forgave her. I always forgave her. But the payments never came. My eyes moved to the next set of documents, the student loan statements. I could see my own handwriting on the checks month after month, year after year, until the balance finally dropped to zero. I had paid for her education while working nights, eating crackers and soup in the break room to stretch my budget, convincing myself it was worth it that one day she would see me not just as a provider, but as a mother who gave her everything. Then there was the mortgage paperwork. The house, Angela and David lived in the very house they returned to after their Florida trip still carried my name on the deed. I had put up the down payment when the bank hesitated to approve their loan. David had smiled so wide that day, shaking my hand like I was an investor in his future, not his wife's mother. He promised he would refinance, put the house solely in their names. But years had passed, and somehow that transfer never happened. My name stayed quietly legally like a ghost on the property. My breath caught as I opened the thickest folder of all, bank transfers. I traced my finger down the columns of numbers, each one a cut against my skin. The largest was circled in red ink, $480,000. The money I had withdrawn from my retirement account to save David's brokerage business when it nearly collapsed. He had stood in my living room, his tie loosened, his voice urgent, promising, "It's just a bridge loan. You'll get it back with interest. I swear." That was 3 years ago. The business recovered. My savings did not. I leaned back, staring at the mountain of proof before me. It wasn't just about the text anymore. It was about every time they had treated me as disposable except for my bank account. It was about every moment I had been useful but never loved. My hands curled into fists on the table. I remembered birthdays when I gave Angela gifts only to watch her toss them aside for something David bought. I remembered dinners where my stories were cut off and my voice drowned under his opinions. I remembered being told gently but firmly that perhaps I should travel more, live my own life, as though my presence was an inconvenience. Every page in front of me whispered the same truth. I had not been a mother in their eyes. I had been a resource, a line of credit with a pulse. And now they thought they could erase me with a single message. My heart steadied, my breathing evened. The weight of the evidence was no longer crushing me. It was lifting me. For the first time, I realized I wasn't powerless. I had the receipts, I had the deeds, I had the truth, and evidence never blinks. By the second night after the message, I thought the storm inside me had begun to calm, but betrayal has a way of echoing louder when you think the noise is fading. I made the mistake of opening Facebook, telling myself I just wanted to see Sophia's face to remind myself of the love that still tied me to this family. What I saw cut deeper than any text message. There they were, Angela, David, Sophia, and little Marcus posed in front of the terminal at the Detroit airport. Angela wore a white sundress I had bought her last summer, her arm wrapped tightly around David's waist. Sophia's gap-toothed smile glowed as she held a stuffed dolphin, the kind you find in tourist shops near the beach. Marcus clutched a toy plane, his small fist raised proudly. Behind them, a caption written by Angela herself. "Finally off to our family getaway. Can't wait for some sunshine and memories." Family only. Family only. The same words she had used to lure me into believing I belonged. Now they mocked me from the screen, a neon sign flashing my exclusion to every friend and acquaintance I had ever known. The comments piled underneath each one a dagger. "Beautiful family. You two are such amazing parents. What a perfect group. Not a single person asked where I was. Not one soul wondered about the woman who had paid for that house, those clothes, that very trip. I scrolled until the faces blurred my chest, hollowing with each swipe. It wasn't just that they had gone without me. It was that they had erased me so thoroughly that the world believed I was never supposed to be there in the first place. My hands shook as I closed the app, but the images stayed branded behind my eyelids. I could hear David's smug voice as though he were in the room. "It's better for you to leave." I thought of Angela's second message. "Please understand," and it curdled in my veins. Understand what? That I was a guest in the life I built for her, that I was a stranger in the family I created. The scarf for Sophia still sat on the suitcase by the wall, untouched. I had imagined giving it to her at the beach, draping it around her shoulders as the sun went down. Now I realized she would never know it even existed. The betrayal replayed itself like a cruel film strip Christmas, where I was asked to sit at the fold-out table in the corner while David's parents enjoyed the main seats. Thanksgiving, when my peach cobbler was left untouched while his mother's pie was praised. Angela's promotion party, where my name was not even mentioned in her speech, though I had paid off the very loans that funded her degree. Each memory built upon the next until the weight of them pressed me flat against the chair. My breath came short, shallow, like I was drowning in plain air. Betrayal is not a single strike. It is a series of small cuts ignored until you are bleeding out. And that night, scrolling through those pictures, I finally saw just how deep the wounds went. I closed my eyes, and for a long moment I felt nothing. No anger, no tears, just a numbness so heavy I thought it might crush me. But beneath it, buried in the silence, something stirred. A whisper, faint but steady. "No more." The numbness clung to me like frost the next morning, but beneath it pulsed a clarity I could no longer ignore. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, my reflection sharp in the cold light. My hair, streaked with silver, framed a face lined by years of sacrifice. My eyes were swollen from tears, but behind them something fierce had awakened. For decades I had defined myself by what I gave my time, my body, my money. I had handed over pieces of myself until there was almost nothing left. And for what? For a daughter who would let her husband speak me out of existence. For a family portrait that no longer included me. My hand gripped the edge of the sink. The porcelain was cool beneath my fingers, grounding me. I whispered aloud, my voice hoarse but steady. "No more." The words felt final, like a verdict read in court. I stepped back, studying myself as if I were someone new. Not the exhausted nurse who worked double shifts, not the bank account they drained at will, not the mother begging for a place at the table. I was a woman who still held power they had forgotten I had. My phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Angela. Just 2 words. We landed. I stared at the screen. Not an apology, not an invitation. Just a notification, as if I were some distant acquaintance who needed to be updated. I set the phone down and walked into the living room where the folders of evidence still lay across the table. My eyes caught on the deed to their house, my name clear as ink, still the rightful owner. A lifetime of silence had made me invisible, but silence could also end. I reached for the phone again, not to answer Angela, but to dial the number I knew by heart. Elaine Carter, my old friend, had once been a sharp lawyer before retirement, and though she no longer argued in court, her mind was as sharp as ever. When she picked up, her voice carried the warmth of familiarity and the weight of judgment. "Marjorie, she said I was waiting for your call." My throat tightened. "You were right, Elaine. They don't want me. They just want what I can give. And I think I'm ready to stop giving." There was a pause, then a slow exhale on the other end. "Then it's time you remembered something. That house. That's not theirs, not legally, not financially. It's yours. And if you want, you can remind them of that fact." The words struck me like a bolt of electricity. I had been so wrapped in the grief of betrayal that I had almost forgotten the simple, undeniable truth. I still had leverage. I still had rights. I still had the power to say no. I pressed the deed flat against the table, my hands no longer trembling. "I'm ready," I whispered. For the first time in years, I felt something like control slip back into my grasp. Not revenge for its own sake, but justice. The difference mattered. Revenge was about them. Justice was about me. I straightened my shoulders, the heaviness in my chest giving way to something steadier. Angela and David thought they could erase me, but they had made one mistake. They underestimated the woman who had built them, and they forgot that evidence never blinks. I spent the next 3 days moving through my house like a woman possessed, but not broken. The air still carried the chill of betrayal, but my steps were steadier, my hands sure as they gathered every scrap of proof I had guarded over the years. I stacked the folders into neat piles: mortgage transfers, loan payments, credit card bills. Each page was a weapon, silent but lethal. Evidence never blinks, I reminded myself. Elaine came over on the 4th morning. She walked in without ceremony, her cane tapping against the hardwood, her eyes sharp beneath her silver curls. She had been my friend for 4 decades through funerals, births, and heartbreaks, and she knew the terrain of betrayal as well as I did. "You've got the paper trail," she said, lowering herself into the chair across from me. "Now you need to decide how to use it." I slid the house deed across the table. "This is the key, isn't it? They live there, but it's mine. They don't even realize how exposed they are." Elaine's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "They realized once. That's why David never refinanced. Keeping your name there made it easier to keep you tethered. He wanted you bound by obligation, but invisible in acknowledgement." The truth burned, but it also cleared the fog. I nodded slowly. "Then I'll cut the tether." Elaine leaned forward. "Listen to me, Marjorie. If you sell that house, you won't just be taking back what's yours. You'll be showing them that they don't get to write you out of the story. You'll be forcing them to see what they tried to erase." Her words settled deep inside me. I had spent years trying to win Angela's love through giving, but maybe the only way to reclaim myself was by refusing to be used anymore. That afternoon, I called a realtor someone Elaine trusted, discreet and efficient. Her name was Patricia Lopez, a woman with a firm handshake and eyes that told me she had handled her share of family wars. I showed her the deed. She checked the county records and confirmed its sole ownership belonged to me. "We can move quickly if you're ready," she said. I hesitated, the image of Sophia flashing in my mind. My granddaughter, innocent in all of this, caught between parents who saw money as power and a grandmother who had given too much. But then I pictured that Facebook post again, the caption, "Family only my absence presented to the world," as if it were natural, justified. My jaw tightened. "I'm ready," I said. Over the next week, Patricia moved swiftly. Photos were taken, listings quietly posted, calls made to serious buyers. I didn't tell Angela. I didn't tell David. Let them enjoy their Florida sun while the ground shifted beneath them. At night, I sat in my chair with the scarf for Sophia still draped across my lap, wondering what she would think years from now. Would she see her grandmother as cruel? Or would she understand that sometimes love requires drawing a line so firm it cannot be crossed? By the end of the week, Patricia called. "We have an offer, a strong one. They want to close as soon as possible." My pulse quickened. It was happening. The house that had chained me to Angela's life of demands and David's arrogance was about to become my act of liberation. I signed the documents with a steady hand, Elaine by my side as a witness. When the pen lifted from the page, I felt something inside me shift. For the first time in years, I was not just reacting to their betrayal. I was acting for myself. The sale would be finalized before they returned from Florida. They would step off that plane expecting to walk back into their home. Instead, they would find a sign on the lawn and a truth they could not deny: the woman they had erased still held the power to erase them. The morning Angela and David returned from Florida, the snow had started to melt, leaving the streets slick and gray. I stood at the window with a cup of coffee, warming my hands, watching their black SUV pull into the driveway that was no longer theirs. The new owner's sold sign, staked in the frozen lawn, gleamed white in the weak sunlight. For a moment, silence hung heavy, and then the shouting began. David was the first to see it. He slammed the car door so hard the frame rattled, his face twisted in disbelief. Angela climbed out slowly, her sunglasses sliding down her nose, her eyes widening as they landed on the sign. Sophia and Marcus stayed in the back seat, their faces confused, small hands pressed against the window. My heart ached for them, but I forced myself to stay rooted. David stormed toward the house, his voice sharp and loud enough for the whole block to hear. "What the hell is this? You can't do this!" I opened the door before his fist could hit it. My spine straightened as I stepped into the cold air. For the first time in years, I didn't shrink under his voice. I held the deed folder in one hand, the papers crisp and undeniable. Angela's voice cracked. "Mom, please tell me this isn't what it looks like." I looked at her, at the daughter I had carried clothed, educated, and financed. Her eyes darted between me and David, searching for an ally. I felt the familiar tug in my chest, the part of me that wanted to comfort her to say it was all a misunderstanding. But then I remembered the text, the Facebook post, the caption, "Family only." My voice came out calm, cold, a blade honed by years of silence. "It looks exactly like what it is. This house was never yours. It was mine, and now it belongs to someone else." David's face reddened, his jaw clenching. "You vindictive old woman, we had an agreement." I cut him off, holding up the deed. "No. What you had was my generosity. What you had was my silence, and you mistook both for weakness. But here it is in black and white ownership in my name. Evidence never blinks, David." Angela's lips parted, her breath catching. "But Mom, our kids, our lives, where are we supposed to go?" I met her gaze, forcing myself not to flinch. "Maybe you should have thought of that before you erased me. Maybe you should have remembered I'm not just a bank account you can drain at will. I am your mother, and I deserved better." For a heartbeat, the street was silent except for the hum of a distant snowplow. Angela's eyes filled with tears, her shoulders trembling, but she said nothing. David, still puffed with fury, took a step closer. "This isn't over. We'll fight this. You'll regret it." I opened the folder and pulled out the stamped contract from the sale, thrusting it toward him like a verdict. "The house is sold. The ink is dry. And the law is on my side. If you want to fight, take it to court. But remember, this justice doesn't care about your temper. Justice cares about evidence, and evidence never blinks." His mouth opened, then closed, words choking on the weight of truth. He turned back to Angela, his voice dropping into a hiss. "She's destroyed us." Angela looked at me, tears spilling freely now. "Mom, why would you do this?" The ache in my chest threatened to crush me, but I stood firm. Because love isn't supposed to be measured by money. Because I will not let you keep teaching my granddaughter that betrayal is normal. And because I am done being invisible. Behind her, Sophia pressed her small face against the window, her eyes wide and sad. For her, I softened my tone just enough. "Tell Sophia I'll always be here for her, but as for you and David, this chapter is closed." I turned and walked back inside, closing the door on their shouts, their pleas, their disbelief. My hands shook, but not with fear. They shook with the release of decades of silence finally broken. For the first time in years, I felt taller, stronger, untouchable. They thought they could erase me with a text. Instead, I had written the ending to their story in ink the law could never wash away. It didn't take long before David made good on his threat. Within 2 weeks, I received notice of a lawsuit, his name scrawled at the bottom of the petition, Angela's signature trembling beside it. They were contesting the sale of the house, claiming I had acted in bad faith, that I had somehow tricked them that the home was theirs by right, even if not by law. I almost laughed when Elaine read the papers aloud at my kitchen table. After everything I had endured, after all the sacrifices laid bare, they still believed entitlement could outweigh evidence. The courthouse smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee when we arrived. I walked through its marble halls with my head high, Elaine at my side, Patricia the realtor trailing behind with the closing documents. My palms sweated, but my steps were steady. I wasn't the woman who had crumbled on her living room floor clutching a scarf. I was the woman who had chosen to fight. Inside the courtroom, David sat rigid in his tailored suit, jaw set, his glare fixed on me as though he could will me back into silence. Angela looked smaller, her eyes darting down whenever mine met hers. For a fleeting moment, I saw my little girl in her, the child who used to cling to my hand on the first day of school. But then, I remembered the text the betrayal typed on her screen, and the vision shattered. The judge, a stern woman with steel gray hair and an expression carved from patience and authority, called us to order. David's lawyer began with bluster painting me as a meddling mother bent on destroying her daughter's happiness. He talked of family of fairness of promises supposedly made, but every word rang hollow because the truth was waiting sharp and undeniable in the stack of documents on our table. When it was our turn, Elaine rose, her voice steady and sharp as glass. She laid out the facts one by one. The deed to the house listing my name as the sole owner. The mortgage statements all in my responsibility. The bank transfer receipts showing $480,000 pulled from my retirement to bail out David's business. The text messages Angela had sent cold and final proof that I had been excluded and erased even as they leaned on my resources. Each exhibit landed with the weight of a hammer. David shifted in his seat, his confidence cracking. Angela's shoulders hunched lower with every page displayed. Finally, Elaine ended with the line that seemed to echo in the stillness of the courtroom. Your Honor, my client has been generous to a fault. She gave her daughter everything supported her son-in-law beyond reason, and in return, they attempted to erase her. But the law does not run on sentiment. It runs on evidence. And as we have shown, the evidence is indisputable. This house was hers to sell. Justice cannot be built on entitlement. Justice must be built on truth. The judge adjusted her glasses, studied the papers, then looked directly at me. Her voice was measured, but her words carried the weight of finality. The court finds in favor of the defendant, Mrs. Ellis. The sale was legal, proper, and binding. The plaintiff's claims are dismissed. Furthermore, the plaintiffs are ordered to pay the defendant's legal fees. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then the air rushed back into my lungs, cool and clean, as though the courthouse itself had exhaled with me. David's face flushed crimson, his fists tightening on the table. Angela covered her mouth with one hand, her shoulders shaking as silent tears slid down her cheeks. I stood my knees steady beneath me and whispered the words I had carried like armor, evidence never blinks. Justice had spoken not with sentiment, not with pity, but with truth. And for the first time in years, I felt the scales of my life balance in my favor. News in a community travels faster than any court order. Within days of the ruling, word had spread that Angela and David had lost their home, their case, and their dignity in front of a judge. Neighbors whispered as they passed, and the once proud couple who hosted barbecues in that backyard now found themselves hushed subjects of gossip in the grocery store aisles. David's brokerage firm, already shaky, took the final blow. Clients began pulling their accounts, unwilling to trust a man whose name was tangled in legal defeat. Within 2 months, his office shut its doors for good. The glossy brochures advertising integrity, stability, success looked like bitter jokes scattered in the wind. Angela, stripped of the home she had once paraded as a sign of her perfect life, moved with David and the children into a cramped rental on the edge of town. Gone were the manicured lawns and gated driveways. Now the streetlights flickered and the neighbors barely looked up. She called me once during that time. Her voice was cracked raw and trembling. Mom, why did you do it? We're struggling. The kids, they don't understand. I held the phone, my chest heavy with the ache of love and hurt interwoven. But I answered with the only truth left between us. I didn't do it to hurt you, Angela. I did it because you hurt me. I did it because love cannot survive if it is only taken, never given. One day, maybe you'll understand. There was silence on the line, broken only by the sound of her breath hitching. She hung up without another word. David never called. Pride bound his tongue too tightly. But I heard from mutual acquaintances that he blamed me entirely, ranting about betrayal, about ingratitude, about how I had destroyed his family. What he could never admit was that it was his arrogance that had destroyed them long before the gavel fell in that courtroom. And yet even as they sank, I found no joy in their downfall. My heart still twisted at the thought of Angela's tears at the image of Sophia and Marcus caught in the storm of choices they hadn't made. But sorrow is not the same as regret. I did not regret standing for myself. I did not regret reclaiming the dignity they tried to strip away. In the weeks after, I began to feel the subtle shifts of freedom. The phone no longer rang with desperate pleas for money. My mailbox was no longer cluttered with their overdue bills. For the first time in years, my paycheck and savings belonged entirely to me. The silence that once felt like exile now felt like peace. Still, the scars remained. At church, people asked gentle questions trying to understand. I offered only short answers. Sometimes love means letting go, I said, and left it at that. In the market, when I saw Angela's old friends, they looked at me with pity or curiosity. I walked past them with my head high. The hardest part was Sophia. When I saw her in town, clinging to Angela's hand, her big eyes found mine across the distance. She waved once a small, uncertain motion before David pulled her forward. That night I lay awake, clutching the little red scarf, wondering if she remembered the promise I had whispered once that Grandma would always be there for her. The aftermath was bitter, yes, but it was also necessary. Betrayal had been exposed. Justice had been served. And now, the pieces of my life scattered for so long were finally mine to gather again. Winter thawed slowly that year in Detroit, the ice on the sidewalks retreating to make way for small shoots of green pushing through the soil. I spent those early spring mornings on my porch with a mug of coffee wrapped in a shawl, watching the world soften again. For the first time in decades, I woke without the weight of someone else's demands pressing against my chest. My paycheck, my home, my decisions, they were mine alone. Peace, I realized, was not silence. Peace was freedom. But peace, like love, has a way of finding you in unexpected places. It came one Saturday afternoon in the form of a timid knock at my door. When I opened it, Sophia stood there, her backpack hanging off one shoulder, her braids a little messy, her eyes wide with worry. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice quivering. "Mom and Dad are fighting again. Can I stay here for a while?" My throat tightened, tears stinging behind my eyes. I knelt down and pulled her into my arms, inhaling the sweet, familiar scent of crayons and vanilla cookies. "Of course, baby," I said, smoothing her hair. "You can always stay here." From that moment, the house no longer felt empty. Sophia's laughter began to fill the corners that had long echoed with silence. She spread her homework across my kitchen table, the same place I had once stacked bills and evidence, and I found joy in guiding her through fractions and spelling tests. On Sundays, we baked together. She perched on a stool beside me, measuring sugar with exaggerated care, flour dusting her cheeks as though she were painted by sunlight. One afternoon, as the smell of peach cobbler drifted through the air, she tugged at my sleeve. "Grandma, you're my favorite person," she said simply. The words nearly broke me. They were so pure, so uncalculated, so far from the barbed love I had known from her mother. I bent down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You're mine, too." Angela called less often after the court case. When she did, her voice was cautious, tinged with shame. "Mom, I know things can't go back," she said once, "but thank you for being there for Sophia." I didn't answer right away. There was too much history between us, too much hurt, but I said softly, "She deserves love that doesn't ask for payment." Angela cried quietly on the other end of the line before hanging up. I let her tears stay with her. With Sophia, I found a rhythm I hadn't realized I was missing. We planted a small garden in the backyard, tomatoes, peppers, marigolds. She insisted on naming each plant as though they were pets. "This one's Daisy," she announced, pointing at a crooked tomato seedling. I laughed until my ribs ached. In the evenings, we curled up on the couch with blankets watching old movies. She loved the way I knew all the lines before the actors spoke them. Neighbors noticed the change in me. At church, women I'd known for years pulled me aside, marveling at the light back in my eyes. "Marjorie, you look 10 years younger," one said, squeezing my hand. I smiled, not from vanity, but from the quiet recognition that healing had finally begun. One evening, Sophia asked about the scarf that had sat folded on my dresser since that night of the text. I handed it to her. "I bought this for you for that trip." I explained, my voice soft, but maybe it was meant for here instead. She wrapped it around her shoulders, twirled once in the living room, and beamed. "Now it's perfect." I realized then that justice wasn't only about courtrooms and deeds. It was about reclaiming my right to love without being used, to give without being erased, to exist without being silenced. And through Sophia, I found that love could still grow even in soil scorched by betrayal. On the last day of spring break, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of pink and gold, Sophia and I stood in the garden dirt, clinging to our fingers. She slipped her small hand into mine, her grip warm and certain. "Grandma," she said, gazing up at me, "will you always be here?" My eyes burned, but my smile was steady. Always, baby, always. As the first marigolds bloomed, I understood something I had been blind to for too long. Betrayal had taken much from me, yes, but it had also cleared space for something purer, something stronger. I no longer needed to chase Angela's approval or fear David's control. My legacy wasn't the house I had sold or the money I had lost. My legacy was the love I poured into this little girl love that asked for nothing in return. The world outside grew quiet as evening settled, but inside me there was a new sound, the steady, unshakable beat of my own heart alive with hope. I may have lost a daughter to betrayal, but in my granddaughter's laughter I found myself again. And this time I would not let go.